Chapter 1. The bartender with a past rusty stag always smelled of old wood, spilled whiskey, and secrets best left buried. Jack Callahan moved behind the bar with the quiet efficiency of a man who had spent years learning how not to be noticed. He poured drinks with a steady hand, wiped down the counter with practiced ease, and avoided eye contact like it was a crime. In Meadowbrook, it was easier that way. The regulars didn't ask questions anymore. They came for the booze, the silence, and maybe the occasional sports game, flickering on the dusty TV in the corner. Jack was part of the furniture, solid, worn, and unspoken. He never smiled, never joined in the laughter, and never stayed a moment past his shift. It wasn't that he disliked people, he just didn't trust them, or himself. At 35, Jack carried his years like heavy stones. His rough hands bore the calluses of both construction work and handcuffs. His knuckles were scarred, his eyes too tired for a man his age. The tattoos on his forearms were faded and hidden beneath rolled-down sleeves, ghosts of a wilder youth. And though no one said it aloud anymore, everyone remembered. Jack Callahan had done time. He didn't mind the silence. It suited him. Better to blend into the wood grain than draw attention in a town that never really let you forget who you used to be. On quiet nights, when the last patrons shuffled out and the bar lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, Jack would lean on the counter, sip a black coffee, and let the weight of the day settle in his bones. It was the only time he allowed himself stillness. But even then, peace was a stranger. Regret crept in like smoke through cracks, whispering reminders of the choices he'd made, the people he'd hurt. The bridges burned. He sometimes wondered if he'd stay this way forever, rooted in place, like one of the bar stools, functional but forgotten. That night, as he mopped the floor for the third time, more out of habit than necessity, he glanced at the bouquet resting in a mason jar at the far end of the bar. It was from a birthday party earlier, bright, fragrant, and oddly out of place among the shadows and old bourbon. Someone had forgotten it. He should have thrown it out hours ago, but something about it made him pause. Yellow daisies, blue cornflowers, and sprigs of baby's breath. Simple, alive. Jack stared at it a long moment, then turned off the lights. The blooms glowed faintly in the moonlight, sneaking through the window. He didn't know who had left them behind, but something about those flowers made his chest ache in a way he couldn't quite explain. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel completely alone. Chapter 2. A bloom in the bath next evening. Just after dusk painted the sky in lavender streaks, Jack was slicing lemons behind the bar when the bell above the door gave its usual rusty jingle. He didn't bother looking up. Locals came and went without ceremony. "Hi there," came a voice, soft and cheery, wrapped in something that made his hands still mid-slice. Jack looked up. She stood in the doorway like a breeze had carried her in, light, floral, and out of place among the dim lighting and sticky floors of the rusty stag. A crown braid curled around her head, strands of chestnut hair slipping free around her temples. In her hands was a bouquet, peonies, sunflowers, snapdragons, so colorful and fresh they looked like they'd been plucked from a painting. "I think I left this behind yesterday," she said with a small smile, holding up the blooms. Jack blinked. "You were with the birthday group?" She nodded, stepping forward slowly. "I'm Lila. I did the flowers. I just stopped by to drop them off and, well, ended up staying for cake and stories." Her voice had a sing-song warmth, and her eyes green, curious, stuck in every inch of the space. She seemed to shine against the old bar's wear and tear. Jack noticed how the regulars paused their beers to glance her way, then returned to their drinks, a little less bitter. "You're the florist," Jack said, more to himself than her. "Guilty," Lila replied with a grin. "Wildflower whimsy. It's the shop with the pink shutters and the crooked sign." He had walked past it 100 times but never once dared to go in. She walked up to the bar and gently placed the bouquet in the same mason jar he'd kept overnight. Thought maybe the place could use a little color. Jack looked at the flowers, then at her. "We don't really get a lot of color in here." Lila's smile didn't falter. "Then maybe you're overdue for some." There was no flirtation in her voice, No pushy cheerfulness, just quiet kindness. It unsettled him more than any drunken brawl ever had. As she turned to leave, she paused, hesitating like someone who wasn't quite finished speaking. Then she reached into her cardigan pocket and placed a single daisy on the counter. "For you," she said simply. "Everyone deserves something lovely." Jack stared at the daisy long after she'd gone. He didn't put it in the trash. He didn't pretend it hadn't happened. He picked it up slowly, held it for a beat, and then carefully, like it might break, placed it beside the register, where the light from the overhead bulb hit it just right. It wasn't much, but it was something. And that night, Jack noticed the bar didn't feel quite as cold. Chapter 3. Wildflowers and whiskey. Daisy stayed on the bar. Jack didn't know why. Maybe it was laziness, maybe it was curiosity, but each morning, as he unlocked the door to the rusty stag, he checked to make sure it hadn't wilted. When it finally began to droop, he replaced the water. Then, without telling himself why, he went to the market and bought a small bunch of daisies to keep it company. It didn't go unnoticed. Regulars raised eyebrows. One asked if the bar was going soft. Jack just shrugged and poured another whiskey. A few days later, she returned. Lila entered like sunlight cutting through clouds, wearing a soft yellow sundress smudged with bits of green pollen on her apron. Her cheeks were pink from the late spring heat, and her hands carried a bouquet of lilacs wrapped in brown paper. "Busy night?" she asked, her voice breezy as she slid onto a stool. Jack gave her a short glance. "You're back. I promised the bar a bit more color," she said, setting the flowers down. "Thought these might liven up the corners." He raised a brow. "You make a habit of bringing flowers to dive bars." Lila chuckled. "Only the ones that feel like they're holding their breath." Jack wasn't sure what that meant, but it nestled into his chest, like a stone sinking into water. She didn't stay long, just enough time to sip a lemonade he offered on the house and chat with old Benny at the end of the bar about hydrangeas. Then she was gone again, like a breeze, and she came again, and again. Always with a few blooms in her hand, always with a gentle word, never asking too many questions. Sometimes she'd stay for a drink. Sometimes she'd just leave a stem on the bar and disappear before he could even thank her. In time, her flowers filled little glass jars across the rusty stag, softening the shadows, interrupting the gloom. Jack noticed things he hadn't in years. The way sunlight hit the bottles on the shelf, the way people lingered longer when Lila was around, how the regulars started to soften under her presence. But most of all, he noticed how her visits made him feel like he was being seen, and not just as an ex-con or a bartender, but as a man. He didn't talk much. She never pressed. Yet, every time she stepped through the door, it was like the bar and the man who ran it breathed a little easier. And just like that, between sips of lemonade and silent exchanges, something delicate began to root itself in the whiskey-soaked air. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. Chapter 4. Cracks in the wall. It started with a request, simple, harmless, unspoken, with a hopeful lift in her voice. "Would you mind helping me carry some flower arrangements to the town square next week?" Lila asked, brushing a loose curl behind her ear as she leaned across the bar, her arms resting beside a freshly placed jar of wild pansies. Jack froze mid-wipe, cloth hanging limp in his hand. He glanced at her, then at the flowers, then back again. "Why me?" he asked flatly. Lila tilted her head. "Because you've got good arms, and I figure you're stronger than I am." He gave a small huff, not quite a laugh, but close. "I'm not exactly a people person. I'm not asking you to give a speech, Jack. Just carry a few buckets of hydrangeas and pretend the sunshine doesn't offend you." He stared at her, unmoving. Moments like this tugged at old instincts. Say no. Keep your distance. Don't get involved. But Lila wasn't forceful. She didn't push or prod. She just looked at him. She always did, with a kind patience that disarmed him more than he liked. "I'll think about it," he muttered. She smiled, bright and easy. "I'll take that as a maybe." All week, Jack tried to convince himself not to go. What did he know about flower arrangements or town fairs? Nothing good ever came from letting people close. Still, her words echoed in his mind like a song stuck on repeat. On Thursday, he stayed late after closing, clearing a space in the back of the bar to practice lifting crates, testing his back like a man expecting to be punished for helping. On Friday, he passed by Wildflower Whimsy after sunset and stood outside, watching the lights flicker inside as Lila moved through the shop, humming to herself, surrounded by petals and colors he couldn't name. He told himself he was just curious, just passing by. Saturday morning came, and with it, a warm breeze and the scent of early summer. Jack didn't show up but around noon, as the fair preparations hit full swing and the town square bloomed with laughter and chatter, Lila turned to pick up another crate and found Jack standing there, hands in his pockets, sleeves rolled, jaw set. "You look like someone who could use a strong back," he said, voice low. Lila blinked, then smiled like sunrise. "You came," he shrugged, "didn't have much else to do." And just like that, a small crack appeared in the wall Jack Callahan had spent years building around himself. A wall she hadn't tried to knock down, just quietly waited beside, offering flowers through the cracks. Chapter 5. Dirt and petals. Jack arrived at Wildflower Whimsy just after sunrise, the mist still clinging to the sidewalks of Meadowbrook like a secret. He hesitated outside the door, staring at the painted pink shutters and the crooked hand-lettered sign above the shop. It looked like something out of a children's book, a place too sweet for someone like him. But Lila had asked, and that mattered more than he wanted to admit. He stepped inside to the soft chime of a bell, and was immediately hit with a wave of scent: lavender, eucalyptus, something citrusy. The shop was a riot of color, flowers spilling from galvanized buckets and wooden crates. Ribbons hung from the rafters. The floor was dotted with petals like a trail of breadcrumbs. She was crouched behind the counter, rummaging through boxes of vases, humming a tune he didn't recognize, when she looked up and saw him. Her face lit up like spring. "You came," she said, brushing a streak of pollen from her cheek with the back of her hand. He shifted awkwardly. "Told you I had nothing better to do." Lila grinned and handed him a pair of gardening gloves that looked comically small in his hands. "Let's get to work." Then, what followed was nothing Jack could have predicted. He fumbled with flower crates, knocked over a bucket of marigolds, and pricked his finger twice trying to arrange roses into symmetrical bundles. At one point, he sneezed so violently after sniffing baby's breath that Lila nearly fell over laughing. She didn't mock him, she laughed with him, her laughter warm and contagious. Jack found himself chuckling too, the sound foreign, but not unwelcome. "You're doing great," she said, as he awkwardly tried to twist floral wire around a bunch of tulips. Jack gave her a look. "I'm destroying your shop one bloom at a time." Lila smiled and gently took the wire from his hands. "You're here. That's more than enough." They worked side by side, hip to hip in the narrow aisles, surrounded by colors and textures Jack had never noticed before. Lila moved with ease and grace, her hands sure and gentle. She told stories about customers, about her grandmother who taught her how to grow peonies, about her favorite flower, sunflowers, because they always find the light. Jack listened, occasionally offering a grunt or a question. Her voice was a bomb, and being near her made the air feel less heavy. At one point, she reached over to tuck a stray sprig of mint behind his ear, laughing when he swatted her hand away. "I'm not a flower arrangement," he grumbled. "No," she said softly. "You're better. You're real." That gave him pause. He didn't know how to respond, so he just went back to trimming stems. By the end of the morning, Jack was covered in dirt and pollen, a few scratches blooming along his forearms, but something inside him felt lighter, like he'd been repotted into sunlight he hadn't known he needed. As he helped load the arrangements into her truck for the spring fair, Lila looked at him, her face flushed from the effort and the joy. "Thank you, Jack," she said. "Today was lovely." He looked down at the mess they'd made, and then at her bright and radiant even with soil on her nose. "Yeah," he said quietly. It was. Chapter 6. Ghosts and good-intentioned. Spring fair brought a rare kind of cheer to Meadowbrook. Chalk art on cobbled sidewalks, children with faces painted like tigers, and the smell of kettle corn drifting through the breeze. Jack had stayed on the sidelines, helping Lila set up her flower stall at the town square before disappearing back into the crowd. Too many eyes, too many chances for someone to remember. He thought he'd managed to avoid the spotlight until he heard his name whispered twice, once with a scarf, once with a smirk. Later that week, it came to a head. A woman in a bright pink scarf entered Wildflower Whimsy, her lips pursed tighter than a rosebud. Lila was at the front counter, arranging a bundle of freesias, when the woman tapped her long nails on the wood. "Darling, your arrangements are just divine," she said with sugary sweetness. "But I'm curious, isn't that Jack Callahan I saw hauling flowers at your booth?" Lila smiled politely. "Yes, he was kind enough to help out." The woman's brow arched like a question mark. "Brave of you, considering his history." There it was, sharpened and flung like a stone across calm water. Lila didn't flinch. "Jack's been nothing but respectful and reliable. He's a good man." The woman's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, people can change, I suppose, though some roots grow deeper than others." When she left, the scent of judgment lingered like perfume. That evening, Jack showed up at the shop unannounced, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and uncertainty in the other. Lila was watering her hanging planters when she saw him. "Word's getting around," he said quietly. She turned, wiping her hands on her apron. "About what?" He gave a hollow smile. "About me. People don't forget, Lila. Doesn't matter how many daisies I carry." She studied him for a moment. "Is that why you came? To warn me away?" "I don't want you caught in my mess." Lila walked toward him slowly, the watering can swinging at her side. "You think your past scares me?" "It should," he said. "I made a mistake. A big one. Spent 3 years in prison for it. I was young, angry, reckless. I hurt people. Maybe not physically, but I didn't care who I stepped on to get what I wanted. And I still pay for that every day." Silence hung between them, thick and honest. Then Lila set down the can and stepped closer. Close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Every minute. Are you that man anymore?" Jack shook his head slowly. "No." "Then we start there," she said gently. "Not with who you were. With who you are." He blinked, not sure how to absorb her kindness. "You don't even know the whole story." "I don't need the whole story to know a good man when I see one," she replied. Jack swallowed hard. No one had ever said that to him. Not in years. Maybe not ever. Besides, Lila added with a soft smile, "I like working with wild things. They bloom the most beautifully." And as the sun dipped behind the town's rooftops, Jack felt something unfamiliar swell in his chest. Not fear, not guilt. Hope. Chapter 7. A dance in the rain. Fair ended with a burst of laughter and lavender-scented air. Jack had helped Lila pack up her stall, careful with every petal, quiet beside her easy joy. They walked the last crate to her truck, just as the sky darkened, not the heavy grey of storms, but that soft kind of dusk where everything feels like it's holding its breath. Jack glanced up. "Think we've got 10 minutes before it opens up." "Then we better move fast," Lila said. Slamming the tailgate shut, they started toward her shop, only a few blocks away, but the rain came faster than either expected, a sudden summer downpour, warm and wild, soaking them to the skin within seconds. Lila shrieked, laughing as she ducked under the awning of an antique bookstore. Jack followed, water dripping from his hair, shirt clinging to his chest. "Well," she said, breathless and beaming. "That was unexpected." Jack leaned against the wall, water running in rivulets down his arms. "You always this cheerful when nature tries to drown you." Lila turned to him, her smile playful. "Only when I'm in good company." The street was nearly empty, just the shimmer of streetlights on wet pavement, the steady rhythm of rain, and the distant flicker of a neon sign. The world felt small and quiet, safe. A soft jazz tune drifted from the shop behind them, barely audible through the walls. Lila tilted her head, listening. Then, slowly, deliberately, she stepped away from the awning, into the rain. Jack stared. "Are you dancing?" he asked, incredulous. "Why not?" she called, spinning once with her arms outstretched, her laughter rising above the rainfall. "It's just water. You're insane," he muttered, She held out her hand. Come be insane with me. Jack hesitated. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden, stay dry, stay guarded. But then her eyes, the same ones that saw past his silence and scars, the same ones that never flinched when he admitted the worst parts of himself. He stepped forward. The rain was warm against his skin, soft like forgiveness. He took her hand, awkward at first, his movements stiff. But Lila moved close, guiding his steps, her body relaxed, trusting. Their fingers interlaced. Her other hand rested lightly against his shoulder. They didn't talk. They didn't need to. They moved together in the rain to people who didn't quite belong anywhere, finding something like belonging in each other. The world blurred around them, the rain muffling everything but their breath, their closeness, their quiet smiles. Jack looked down at her, soaked and radiant, her eyelashes heavy with droplets. You're something else. Lila Bloom, he said softly. She looked up, eyes shining. So are you, Jack Callahan. And there, in the middle of a sleepy town street, beneath the rain and the glow of a flickering street lamp, they danced. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but beautifully. Chapter 8. Thorns and Truth's rain had passed, but its memory lingered on the streets, in the scent of damp earth, and most of all in Jack's chest. He hadn't stopped thinking about that night, the way Lila's hand had felt in his, the laughter, the warmth, the possibility. But Meadowbrook had a way of reminding him who he was. A week later, Jack was behind the bar, restocking bottles, when the front door creaked open and a voice he hadn't heard in years crawled in ahead of its owner. Well, look who's gone soft. The man chuckled, strolling in with swagger too big for the room. Jack straightened. Derek Monroe, all faded denim and cocky smirk, looked like trouble poured into boots. He hadn't changed much since prison, just a few more wrinkles around the eyes. The same careless grin that had gotten them both in trouble years ago. Didn't think you'd still be here, Derek said, sliding onto a stool. Thought you'd have skipped town the moment your parole ended. Jack said nothing, just poured 2 glasses of water and slid one across the counter. Derek scoffed. No whiskey. Guess this really isn't the Jack I knew. I don't serve free drinks, not even to ghosts. Derek laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. Still sharp. I like that. Word is, you've been getting cozy with the flower girl. What was her name? Lila. Jack's jaw tensed. Leave her out of it. Derek leaned forward. Relax. I'm not here to stir the pot. Just passing through. Thought I'd say hi to an old friend. Maybe remind the town what we used to be. Jack's voice dropped, low and firm. We're not friends. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Derek stood, drained the water, and gave a slow, mocking smile. People don't forget, Jack, especially around here. When he was gone, Jack remained behind the bar, gripping the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. He knew what Derek's presence meant. Whispers, suspicion, fear. The carefully laid peace he'd built, already fragile, was now under threat. That evening, as twilight draped itself over Meadowbrook, Jack walked to Wildflower Whimsy. The bell above the door jingled softly. Lila looked up from arranging a cluster of dahlias, her face lighting up. Hey, stranger, I was starting to think you were hiding from me. I might be, he said quietly. She frowned, setting the flowers down. What's wrong? Jack leaned against the door frame, his shoulders heavy. Someone from my past showed up today. Someone who knew me back when I was, worse, an old friend. She asked gently. No, Jack said. An old mistake. Lila stepped closer, concern knitting her brow. Do you want me to worry? He shook his head. No, I just needed to see you. She touched his arm, grounding him. Then I'm here. You don't have to face ghosts alone. Jack looked into her eyes, steady, kind, full of something he didn't feel worthy of. And just like that, in the middle of a flower shop that smelled of dahlias and second chances, he realized something terrifying. He was starting to fall for her. And that meant he had something to lose. Chapter 9. Withering confidence. Jack didn't sleep much after Derek's visit. He lay awake in his small apartment above the Rusty Stag, listening to the hum of the town settling for the night and the restless echo of his thoughts. Lila deserved peace. She deserved bright mornings filled with fresh-cut flowers, not whispers about the man who once broke the law. And if Derek stayed around or worse, stirred up all trouble, Jack feared the storm would fall on her to dot. So he did the only thing he thought would protect her. He pulled away. He stopped walking by Wildflower whimsy, stopped texting her the way he had grown to do simple things like your peonies made it through the heat wave or old Benny wants another sunflower for the bar. He stayed behind the counter, buried in inventory and small talk, pretending it didn't ache every time the door opened, and it wasn't her. Lila noticed Dot at first. She gave him space, thinking maybe he was busy, but by day 5, her heart was too heavy with confusion to ignore. She arrived at the Rusty Stag just after the evening rush. Jack saw her the moment she walked in, hair swept up in a lazy bun, cheeks flushed from the summer sun, a small bouquet of forget-me-nots in her hand. "Hey," she said, soft but steady. "Can we talk?" Jack glanced around. "Now's not a good time." Lila, her brows pulled together. "You haven't answered a single message. You barely look at me." He turned away, wiping down the bar. "Been busy?" "No," she said, voice firmer now. "You've been running." Jack's hands stilled. Lila stepped closer, placing the bouquet gently on the counter. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he whispered. "Then why are you acting like you don't care?" Jack finally met her eyes, and there it was, the storm behind his silence. "Because I do care," he said, his voice rough. "Too much, and that's the problem." She blinked, caught off guard. "I don't understand." "I'm not safe, Lila. My past isn't just history, it has teeth. People like Derek don't disappear. And people talk. They'll look at you differently for being near me." Lila's heart cracked quietly inside her chest. "You think I care what people say?" She asked. "You should," he said. "Because I can't be the reason you lose the warmth you've worked so hard to grow." Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back. She pulled something from her pocket, another bouquet. Small and imperfect, wrapped in newspaper and ribbon. She set it beside the forget-me-nots. "I made this for you," she said, her voice trembling. "It's filled with meanings: snapdragons for strength, violets for faith, and rosemary for remembrance. Because I see you, Jack, all of you, and I don't want you to forget who you're becoming." He stared at the bouquet, speechless. "I'll go," she said, stepping back. "But not because I'm giving up, just because I need you to decide if you're going to let fear decide your story." And then she was gone, leaving behind two bouquets, and a silence that had never felt so loud. Chapter 10. The town turns cold. Rumors, in a town like Meadowbrook, moved faster than wildfire and burned just as hot. It started with a break-in at Winslow's Hardware. A shattered window, some missing cash, a few tools gone. No major damage, but enough to rattle nerves. By morning, whispers had found their way into cafes, barbershops, and front porches, and by noon, they found their way to the Rusty Stag, wrapped in lowered voices and pointed glances. Jack felt it before he heard it. The shift in the room, the sudden hush when he passed by, the way people who'd once nodded at him now looked away, or worse, looked at him like they knew something dark and unsaid. He didn't need to hear the words. He'd lived this story before. Later that afternoon, Deputy Collins walked into the bar, clipboard in hand, sympathy in his eyes. "Routine questions," he said, voice casual. "We're asking everyone who lives or works near Main Street if they saw or heard anything." Jack nodded. "I close late. Didn't hear anything unusual." Collins scribbled something, then paused. "You keeping in touch with anyone from your old life?" Jack's jaw tightened. "Not by choice," the deputy sighed. "Look, Jack, I know you've been keeping your nose clean, volunteering at the shelter, helping at the fair, staying out of trouble. But you know how people are." "I do," Jack said. His voice clipped. "Thanks for the reminder." When Collins left, Jack stood behind the bar longer than usual, hands gripping the edge until his knuckles paled. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It was how quickly the town forgot everything else he'd done to be better. That evening, the bar was half empty, but the air was thick with judgment. Even Benny, who'd always sat at the far end nursing one drink 4 hours, gave a wary glance before settling in. Jack felt it in every word unsaid. At closing time, he turned off the lights and sat in the dark, the flicker of the neon beer sign humming in the window behind him. He didn't see Lila that day. He hadn't seen her since she left the bouquet, and the truth on his counter. He missed her more than he could admit. The silence pressed against him like a punishment, reminding him that in Meadowbrook, redemption had an expiration date, and for a man with his kind of past, all it took was one broken window to undo everything he'd rebuilt. Chapter 11. Petal by Patel. The town meeting was held in the old church hall, just like it always had been, with panelled walls, folding chairs, and a rickety microphone that crackled with every speaker's sigh. Most of Meadowbrook showed up, not because they cared about the broken window but Winslow's hardware, but because they cared about what it meant, or who it could mean. Jack didn't go. He stayed behind the bar, cleaning glasses that were already spotless, listening to the distant hum of life outside his window. He knew better than to walk into a room where every gaze might become a weapon, but Lila Bloom walked in. She arrived alone, a small envelope clutched in one hand, and a sprig of rosemary pinned to her cardigan. She stood quietly near the back, unnoticed at first, until her name was called to speak during the community voices portion of the meeting. The murmurs began the moment she stepped up to the mic. Everyone knew who she was. Now the florist who'd been spending time with Jack Callahan. Some smiled politely, some stiffened. One woman in the front row whispered something sharp behind her hand. Lila took a breath. "I didn't come here to talk about a broken window," she began, her voice calm and steady. "I came here to talk about what we're breaking with our silence." The room hushed. "I know many of you have heard the rumors," she continued. "I know what's being implied, that someone who made a mistake years ago must still be defined by it, that the past is a sentence that never ends." She paused, letting her words settle. "But I've gotten to know Jack Callahan, not the version from court records, the version who hauls buckets of flowers without complaint, who spends his evenings helping elderly customers carry bags to their cars, who listens more than he speaks, and gives more than he thinks he deserves." A few heads turned, a few arms crossed, but no one interrupted. "I'm not blind to his past," Lila said. "I just refuse to let it be the only part of him people remember. Because if we can't believe in growth, in forgiveness, in second chances, then what kind of town are we really?" The room was still, the air thick with something heavier than judgment now. Shame, perhaps, or reflection. And if we can't trust our neighbors to change, then maybe we haven't changed either. Lila stepped down, her cheeks flushed, her heart pounding. No one clapped, but no one spoke either. Outside, she stood on the church steps, pulling her cardigan tighter against the breeze. She didn't know if it had made a difference, but she'd said what needed saying. Back at the bar, Jack was sweeping when the door opened quietly. Lila stepped in, her eyes soft. He straightened. "What are you doing here?" "I stood up for you tonight," she said simply. Jack froze. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she whispered, "but I wanted to." He looked at her for a long moment, something breaking open in his chest. Gratitude, guilt, love, maybe, though he didn't dare say it yet. And then he walked around the bar, slowly, and said the only thing that came to mind. "Thank you, Lila." She smiled. "We're all just trying to bloom where we're planted, Jack, even if the soil's been rough." And for the first time in days, something inside him bloomed, too, quietly, petal by petal. Chapter 12. Second chances take work. The community garden sat on the edge of Meadowbrook, tucked behind the library, where the land dipped just enough to catch the sun all day. It had once been a forgotten plot of soil and weeds until volunteers turned it into rows of raised beds and winding gravel paths, lined with signs painted by schoolchildren. Jack stood at the entrance with dirt under his nails and hesitation in his heart. Lila had told him about the volunteer program weeks ago. She said it helped people feel useful, connected. But Jack had never been one for group projects or community anything. He still wasn't sure what made him show up that morning. Other than the weight of her words echoing in his chest, he kept his head down, nodding briefly at the woman handing out gloves and trowels. Most people avoided him anyway. The ones who didn't recognize him, some with sympathy, others with wary distance. The plot he was assigned was overgrown with weeds, the soil dry and stubborn, a perfect reflection of how he felt inside. He got to work without expecting much, pulling weeds, turning soil, repeating the motion until sweat soaked the back of his shirt. It was hard, repetitive work, but it was honest. And slowly, without fanfare, the rhythm of it quieted the noise in his mind. By the third day, someone left a note on a small stake at the edge of his bed. "Looking good. Keep going." In bright marker with a little smiley face. No name, just encouragement. Jack tucked the note in his pocket, like it was something fragile. Each morning, he came a little earlier, stayed a little later. He added compost, planted seeds, watched green things push up from the earth, like small miracles. He built a trellis from scrap wood and started training beans to climb. People began to nod at him, nothing more, but it was something. And then one afternoon, as he was pruning the edges of a tomato vine, he heard the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel. Lila. She wore her hair tied back with a faded bandana and carried a brown paper bag in her arms. "I brought lunch," she said with a smile. "And lemon balm tea." Jack stood, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied, handing him a sandwich. "But I wanted to see what you were growing." They sat on the edge of the garden bed, sharing bites and quiet glances. "I never thought I'd have a green thumb," Jack admitted, brushing dirt from his fingers. "You're not just growing plants," Lila said. "You're growing trust. With yourself. With this place." Jack looked around. Bees hovered over wildflowers. A child giggled nearby, chasing a butterfly. It felt peaceful. "Still feels like people are waiting for me to mess up," he murmured. "Then don't," she said softly. "Prove them wrong. One seed at a time." He looked at her then, really looked. Her kindness was never performative. It was planted, deep-rooted, steady, real. And for the first time, Jack didn't feel like he was living in the shadow of who he used to be. He felt like a man building something new. One quiet day, one small seed at a time. Chapter 13. When hearts are radiate was a warm Sunday morning when Lila unlocked the doors to Wildflower Whimsy and found a mason jar already waiting on the steps. Inside it was a bouquet from her shop, not from any florist at all. The stems were unevenly trimmed, the blooms a little wild and sun-worn, but arranged with obvious care. There were marigolds, chamomile, blue cornflowers, and at the center, a single daisy. Her breath caught in her throat. Tied to the jar was a note in Jack's familiar handwriting. "Grown, not bought. Thought you might like something that started from scratch. Like me." Later that afternoon, as the golden light slanted through the storefront windows, the bell over the door rang. Jack stepped in, hair damp from a recent shower, wearing his cleanest flannel. In one hand, he held his cap. In the other, nothing. No excuse. No wall to hide behind. Lila looked up from the counter, heart fluttering. She hadn't seen him since the garden lunch, but he had lived in her thoughts every day since. He approached slowly, pausing in front of the bouquet she had placed in a vase beside the register. "You found them," he said. "They were beautiful," she replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Still are." Jack shifted his weight, clearly nervous. "I wasn't sure what to say, so I figured maybe the flowers could talk first." "They did," she said gently. "But I'm glad you came too." He glanced around the shop, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about deciding whether to let fear write the rest of my story." Lila stepped around the counter, standing a few feet from him now, and Jack met her eyes. "I don't want to live afraid anymore. I want to build something real, good, rooted, not just in soil, but in US." A pause. Then, "If you still want that." Lila didn't answer with words. She took the final step forward, closing the space between them, and gently placed her hand on his cheek. Jack leaned into it like it was the first warm thing he'd felt in years. Their lips met in a kiss that wasn't rushed or unsure, it was steady. Like a promise unfolding dot, it tasted like lemon balm and sunlight, like forgiveness and wildflowers. When they parted, Jack pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't know how to be perfect," he murmured. "I don't want perfect." Lila whispered back, "I want you. When your heart's ready." Jack smiled and fully, freely, the way he never had before. "It is," he said. "It's ready." And beneath the soft rustle of leaves outside and the quiet bloom of 1,000 flowers behind them, their story began to blossom. Chapter 14. Roots and redemption news came on a Monday morning, a gust of clean air through a cracked window. The hardware store thief had been caught on camera, trying to break into another shop 2 towns over. A drifter with a string of petty crimes, no connection to Meadowbrook or anyone in it. Jack wasn't guilty. He never had been. But it still felt like a verdict had finally been spoken aloud, even if the town hadn't bothered to apologize. Lila heard the news from Deputy Collins, who offered a sheepish smile when he passed her shop. "Guess we got that one wrong," he said, tugging at the brim of his hat. She just nodded, not gloating, not smug, just relieved. For Jack, for everything they'd fought to protect. That evening, Jack stood behind the bar at the Rusty Stag, polishing glasses when a few regulars, Benny, old Joe, even Clara the baker, offered hesitant nods as they ordered their drinks. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A beginning. Later, the door swung open, and Lila stepped in, cheeks flushed from the cool air, her arms holding a brown basket wrapped in linen. "Thought I'd bring a peace offering," she said with a grin. "Fresh scones. And I threw in some honey butter." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You trying to bribe the bartender?" "Maybe," she teased. "Or maybe I just wanted to see that look on your face when you finally realize you're free." He set the towel down and came around the bar, letting her set the basket down. His hands found hers, warm and steady. "I didn't realize how heavy it was," he said quietly, carrying everyone's doubt. "You don't have to anymore," Lila replied. "You don't owe this town anything, Jack, but they're starting to see what I've seen all along." He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "I want to give something back, not because I owe it, because it feels right." That night, Jack returned to the old vacant lot beside the bar, the one full of broken glass, overgrown weeds, and rusted fence posts. He stood in the middle of it, hands on his hips, and saw more than a mess. He saw a place to plant something new. Over the following weeks, he poured himself into it, clearing debris, pulling weeds, leveling soil. He brought in lumber and built raised beds with the help of volunteers who slowly trickled in after seeing him work day after day, without fanfare or complaint. Kids started helping, to planting lavender and pansies under his watchful eye. Neighbors brought seeds, tools, coffee, conversation. He called it Second Bloom. The name was Lila's idea. Fitting, he'd said, because the garden and Jack himself had grown from rough beginnings. On one afternoon, as the last sunflower was planted in the center of the garden, Jack stood with dirt-streaked arms and a calm in his chest he hadn't known he was capable of, not because the town had forgiven him, but because he'd finally started to forgive himself. Chapter 15. Whiskey, Wildflowers, and Forever. Sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills when Jack led Lila down the gravel path beside the Rusty Stag, his hand wrapped gently around hers. The late summer air was warm and golden, carrying the scent of lavender and soil freshly turned. Crickets chirped in the distance. The garden was quiet, waiting. "Close your eyes," Jack said with a nervous smile. Lila raised an eyebrow, but obeyed, her fingers still laced with his. He guided her forward slowly, careful not to let her trip on the uneven stones beneath their feet. "Okay," he whispered once they'd stopped. Now open. Before them stretched the completed garden, Second Bloom in full, vibrant glory. Raised beds overflowed with marigolds and mint, sunflowers towering proudly along the fence. Strings of fairy lights hung from poles, ready to glow at twilight. A small wooden bench sat beneath a blooming dogwood tree, painted a soft blue, and in the center of it all, a narrow wooden arch wrapped in vines and daisies. Lila gasped, her hand rising to her heart. "Jack, it's beautiful." He stepped in front of her, reaching into his pocket with trembling fingers. "I built it with my own hands, but it wouldn't exist without you." Lila's eyes shimmered. "You gave it a name." "I gave it meaning," he corrected. "Because that's what you gave me." He opened the small velvet box. Inside was a simple silver ring, adorned with a delicate engraving of wildflowers along its band. Nothing flashy, nothing grand, but entirely theirs. Jack dropped to one knee, his voice unsteady, but certain. "I once believed I didn't deserve anything good, not forgiveness, not love. But then you walked into my bar with a daisy and a smile and changed everything. You made a home in my heart without asking for anything in return. And now, I can't imagine a life that doesn't start and end with you." Lila covered her mouth, tears spilling over her cheeks. "Lila Bloom, will you marry me?" She laughed through her tears, nodding even before she could speak. "Yes, Jack, of course, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled him to his feet, wrapping her arms around him as if to hold the moment in place forever. They kissed beneath the arch, surrounded by the flowers they'd grown, the town they'd rebuilt their lives in, and the kind of love that doesn't ask to be perfect, only real. That night, the fairy lights flickered to life, casting soft glows on petals and promises. Inside the Rusty Stag, the bar now adorned with flowers on every table. People raised glasses in quiet celebration. And outside, in the garden made from broken ground and hopeful hearts, Jack and Lila swayed in each other's arms, no longer dancing in the rain, but in the warmth of something lasting, a life built together, rooted, forgiven, forever.